and welcome to the next episode of the Mourning Brew, with me, your host, Lee Petcher. Be advised that this podcast deals with issues of the passing of a loved one and the dealing with grief. So if these issues are upsetting to you at the moment, please come back to us when you feel ready to do so. Remember, you are not on your own. Otherwise, pour yourself a brew, get comfy, and we'll begin. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Mourning Brew with me, Lee Petcher. I hope you've got your brews ready so that we can dive into the episode. If not, hit pause or take whatever device you're listening to this podcast on into the kitchen, boil the kettle, and pour yourself a nice brew. I mean, who doesn't love a brew? I remember my mum saying that everything, all your problems can be sorted down with a nice cup of tea. And also let me know what it is that you are drinking. Me, I prefer Yorkshire tea, being a Yorkshireman. Can't beat it. Some people prefer Tetleys. I don't mind a Tetleys. PG tips, not my bag. And some of you even like coffee. I mean, again, that's not for me. But pour whatever it is that's going to make you feel happy. Get yourself comfy and we'll dive in. Just another quick trigger warning. We are going to be talking about issues of a sensitive subject, about the passing of loved ones. So again, if you're not quite in the right headspace to hear this, if it triggers up many memories or feelings and you just don't feel like you can cope with them right now, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That happens to me all the time. Just hit pause or hit stop, go out, do something that makes yourself happy, whether it be a walk in nature, walk the dog, put something funny on the TV, listen to some music, have a dance, whatever it is, just to get you back into a happy and uplifted kind of mindset. And we're always going to be here, so if you don't feel like coming back to us today, that's fine. Just come back to us whenever you feel ready to. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast. There's no right or wrong. Just consume it as and when you feel ready to. Before we delve right into the podcast, I want to give a huge shout out to Tony Rossi of the Actor Problems podcast. He was kind enough to invite me onto his podcast recently, where we managed to talk about everything grief related, all the things that I'd gone through. So if you're here from Tony's podcast, a huge shout out to you guys. Welcome. Please join the community. It's absolutely fantastic. But Tony was amazing, and we delved slightly into the things that we talk about here. I gave him a brief description of the death of my mum and dad, my grandparents and my friend, which, you know, obviously we are going to go into more detail here. But even just talking to Tony, I managed to realise certain things about myself, certain things that I'd been holding back, certain things that I thought I'd let go of and I hadn't. And that was very therapeutic. So Tony Rossi, huge shout out to you. And if there are any actors or performers on this podcast, once you've finished listening to me, go over and check him out. He's a top bloke. Can't recommend him high enough. So wow, this is episode 2. As I said in episode 1, I started this podcast as a means just to help as many people as I can who are going through these troubling times. And it's not just 2020, in which, you know, I'm currently recording this with the whole COVID situation. I mean, death and grief is a part of life. So no matter when you come into this, I hope that these words offer you some encouragement, some advice, and, you know, just welcoming and comforting. That's all I can hope for. So episode 2, I decided to start where my journey on grief kind of started, and that's with the loss of my grandparents. They were the first people who passed away that had any kind of effect on me. For many people, the death of their grandparents in childhood or early adulthood, this will be their first experience with loss. And the fact that most of us experience at least one loss of this kind in our lifetime, it doesn't make the grieving process any easier. I mean, experiencing the death of a loved one for the first time can be confusing and scary for anyone, and it can lead to questions about death. You know, it's their first port of contact, really. So as I said in episode 1, I didn't know my grandma and granddad Smith. And this is what's sad. And this is what I want to try and convey to people out there is, even though I spoke to my mum about my grandma and granddad Smith, I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know when they died. I didn't know when they were born. I didn't know what they did. I didn't know anything apart from the names, really. And I only know my granddad's name, Peter Smith, because I'm named after him. My first name is Peter. So my mum wanted to name me after her dad. And that's really all I knew. It wasn't until later that I knew that my grandma was called Daisy. I now have a niece called Daisy. And then I knew my granddad was in the Navy. My mum used to love telling me that he was in the Navy and that he passed the equator twice. And every time he passed the equator, he got a certificate, which a few years before my mum passed, I got framed for her. I always thought that was cool. When I was younger, I always wanted to learn how to fly planes. I wanted to be a pilot. The thing is, I don't have 20/20 vision. For a lot of my life, I had to wear glasses. In fact, I still have to wear glasses, but I chose not to for a while. So I was never going to be able to fly planes. But my mum wanted me to join the Navy like her dad did. And, you know, to this day, I love water. I love being on boats. I remember one ferry ride with my mum, my dad, and my brother, and people were rocking from side to side. It was quite choppy, and I was fine. And again, you know, I'm putting that down to my granddad. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know there's no genetics in that, but, you know, that's what I put it down to. But researching this episode, it did bring back those feelings of guilt, of not really sitting down with my mum and going, Mum, okay, tell me about everything. And I'll go into why that is a bit more painful a bit later on. So I had to ask my Auntie Carol and her daughter Tammy to get me some information. Shout out to my Auntie Carol and my cousin Tammy. Love you both. But because my mum's no longer here, this is what I had to do. So my granddad, on my mum's side, his name was Peter Smith. He was born on the 7th of October back in 1908. 1908. Man, that's crazy to me. He died on the 31st of May, 1973, which meant he was 64 years old and 7 months. So let's round that up to 65. The occupation that I knew of him, and it's just through finding my mum's birth certificate, is that he was a wardroom attendant at the Navy. So by my calculation, and maths is by no means my strong point, my mum was 22. 22 when her dad died. And again, that's nuts. I mean, I was 23 when my dad died. And so the parallels there are just, I know they're coincidental, but it's weird. And it's like we had so much in common there, me and my mum. But I didn't realise that, and we never talked about it. My grandma on my mum's side, her name was Daisy May Smith. Her previous name, her maiden name, should we say, was Bolton. She was born on the 16th of August, 1907. That's a year before my granddad. She got herself a little toy boy. I love that. Same month. Same month. Now that's crazy as well, because my mum and dad were born in the same month. I mean, 10 years apart, but same month. Again, coincidental, but all these coincidences, they add up, don't they, really? She died on the 26th of September, 1979. So she was, 71 and 11 months? So 72 years old. And my mum, again, was only 28. So my mum was younger than I was when she lost both of her parents. And I thought I had it hard. But she wasn't even 30. I mean, my girlfriend, Emma, love you, she's turning 30 next month. And it baffles me that younger than her, she lost both her parents, my mum. And I can't imagine what that must have been like. I mean, I can imagine it kind of now, but I'm slightly older than that. You know, I'm in my 30s, mid-30s, and I mean, it's never good, but the younger you are, man, the more my heart bleeds. It does. So there was 6 years between my granddad dying and my grandma dying. Now, on my dad's side, the Petcher side, it's Grandad Joe. Now, we have a tradition in the Petchers where it seems like the firstborn male of every child is called Joe. So my granddad was Joe. I think his dad was called Joe. My dad was called Joe. My brother is called Joe. One of my other brother's sons is called Joe. And I think Emma kind of wants to put a stop to that. He was born on the 4th of August, 1918. And he died on the 20th of March, 1995. So he was 76 and 7 months. So let's round that up to, he was 77. His occupation, he was a welder. I knew that he had something to do with the cathedral in Bradford City. Now, I want to say he did something with one of the doors or the roofs. I can't remember. My God, this is bad. Again, this is why it's important to talk. Talk to your grandparents whilst they're alive. Take it all in. I was young when my granddad died, but I could have talked to my dad about it. I could have talked to my aunties and uncles about it. Because, man, I wish I did. Because then I'd know these answers, and it kills me, eats me up a bit inside. Again, with my grandma and my granddad on my dad's side, some information I don't know. And I had to go to my Auntie Eileen. I love you too, Auntie Eileen. And she had to give me some of this information. I mean, it's good that I'm doing the research now. And, you know, it's never too late to do the research on your loved ones. And there's those ancestry trees that you can do and things like that, which are brilliant. But it doesn't be first-hand knowledge. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, he was a welder. And I know from a story that he used to tell that he was also in the army. So when the war was breaking out over in England, my granddad joined this queue to sign up to join the army. And it was a long queue. And when he got to the front of the queue, the corporal or the general or whoever it was that was signing people up asked him his age. And I can't remember exactly. He said he was either 16 or 17. But he was too young to join the army. And he said, right, join the end of the queue. And by the time you get back up here, you're 18. You're old enough to join. So he did. He went to the back of the queue, queued all that time, got to the front and said he was 18 and got in. And that's just inspiring, man. I love that story. Whenever I remember it, it always brings a smile to my face. My grandma on my dad's side was Margaret Petcher. Her maiden name was Connell. Apparently it was O'Connell. She was Irish, of Irish descent. Her family's from County Sligo, where Westlife are from, which is a good bonus from my girlfriend. She's a massive Westlife fan. And, you know, I want to go back to Ireland and just see where she was born and raised. So Margaret Petcher, she was born on the 16th of July, 1921. And died on the 18th of January, 2005. She was 83 and 6 months when she passed, so let's say 84. And she was a woolcomber. And there was 10 years difference between my grandma dying and my granddad dying. Now there's another coincidence, because there was 10 years between my dad dying and my mum dying. Again, these little coincidences, they just keep adding up. So my dad was 54 when his dad died, and he was 63 when his mum died. Now my dad he was a grown man at this point. He had kids, he had grandkids, he had great grandkids. So I would have loved, I mean, I experienced what he went through, but I would have loved to have just sat down and chatted to him. So my grandma and granddad Smith died in the 70s. I was born in the 80s. There was no chance for me to have met them, which I'm sad about in a way, because I heard that they were great people. But I can't be sad over something that I never experienced. So I'm not missing anything there. And when I went to school and all my friends were talking about how close they were to their grandparents and things like that, the only people I could really relate to on that was my grandma and granddad Petcher, who I wasn't extremely close with. But, you know, we went to visit them every so often, especially Christmases and birthdays, and every now and again we'd pop around, Easter, that kind of thing. But I wasn't close enough to form a massive bond with them. So having that relationship with the grandparents, I envied other people. One of my best friends in first school, he lived with his grandparents, and he saw them as parental figures, which I think, again, like, everybody experiences these relationships in many different ways, and that's something else you've got to remember when it comes to grief. Don't let anybody belittle you for the way that you feel about that particular person, because all that grief is your manifestation of love on that person. You could love your grandparents more than you love your parents, so it would hit you harder for them to pass than your actual parents would. There's these phrases that go around when grandparents die, especially. It's like, oh, they lived a good life, or they were old. Yeah, they were, and yeah, they did, but it doesn't take the pain away anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, that pain is still going to be there. So when you're talking to people who have lost grandparents, or somebody who you don't perceive as immediate family, like, be careful with the words that you use when you're comforting them, because you don't know what value they had on their life. So I never met my grandma and granddad Smith. Like, we've established that. And the reason I keep coming back to this is because there's this beautiful story that I want to tell. When I was born, we already know from episode 1 that I wasn't meant to be born, because, you know, my mum was told she could never conceive. So it's just a miracle that I'm here anyway. But when I was born with some heart problem, some heart kind of defect. I don't really know what it was. I never asked about it. But this is just what my mum told me. And I suffered from this for a good 2 years. So much so that the GP that was seeing me and overlooking my progress came on his wedding day to watch me pass. And he sat with my mum. And I did. And my mum says that it was a good few minutes. No breathing, no pulse. And then out of nowhere, I woke up, said Grandma and Grandad did it, and fell back asleep. I never met my Grandma and Grandad. Certainly not met my Grandma and Grandad Petcher, because at this point, I wasn't even known to them. So I said Grandma and Grandad did it, fell back asleep, and the next week, I was humming. You know how every couple has a song? Well, for the next week, apparently, I was humming Grandma and Grandad's song. I'd never heard it. There was no way of me knowing it. So apparently, something happened where I may have crossed over, and my Grandma and Grandad said, nope, not just yet. You're going back to our little girl. She needs you. And here I am. Now, I don't believe in life after death. I don't believe in any kind of religion. I'm agnostic. But there's something there, right? And I love that story. And that gave my mum so much hope and joy. So I mentioned there that I hadn't met my Grandma and Grandad Petcher at this point either. Now, this is controversial. You see, for me to be born, my dad was having an affair on my brother's mum at the time. So my dad didn't want me necessarily, which is a whole other episode, but that's as it is for now. So me and my mum were living elsewhere in secret. My dad would come over every now and again, drop off presents and money and whatnot. I remember little bits about that, not too much. As far as the Petchers knew, I wasn't around. It wasn't until about I was 5 years old, maybe a little bit younger. After my brother's mum passed, I was then brought into the family. Me and my mum were brought into the family home, so to speak. And it was on my brother's birthday. It could have been his 16th birthday because it was a big birthday. Was I introduced to my grandma and granddad, Petcha, for the very first time. And there's a picture of me somewhere, I'll try and dig it out, put it on social media, of me meeting my grandma and granddad for the first time. So that said, I didn't have that close a relationship with either of my grandparents. I was 10 when my granddad died. And I remember this. I remember coming down from my bedroom, getting ready for school one day, eating breakfast. And there was a load of commotion going on in the house. The phone was ringing non-stop. Aunties and uncles were coming round. And this is one of the only times I really saw my dad cry. And I couldn't understand what was going on. But my mum wouldn't say anything. She was just ushering me to get ready to go to school. So we went, and I was in the car getting ready to walk into school, and I said, "Mum, what's going on?" And I could tell that she didn't know how to say this. I mean, this is my first experience with death. And she turned around to me and said, "Your granddad died last night." And I remember feeling a bit weird about it all. I wasn't necessarily sad, but I didn't know how to comprehend what was going on. Because I thought death was this big end. Like, why am I going to school and carrying on life when my granddad had died? Now, my granddad, every time I went round to the house on visits, he'd always have a little car for me ready to take. He must have had a closet full of toys, because I'm sure that every cousin, every nephew and niece, anybody who went round got a present. And it's like he knew that we were coming. And he would always sit in his chair. He was the patriarch of the family. He was, if you think of it like the mafia, he was the Don. So this was a big thing for the family. It was massive. So I went into school and my mum told the teacher what had happened. And again, I'm just feeling weird. Like, everything's not quite right. Then we go to assembly. And in assembly, we sing songs. And this one day, we were singing The Streets of London. And if you've not heard the song, go and listen to it. It's a sad song. It's about the homeless in London. And the first line of the song is, "Have you seen the old man who walks the streets of London?" And for some reason, because I knew my granddad was an old man, an image just came to my head and I just burst into tears. Like, you couldn't console me for the world at that point, which is odd. Because, like I said, I wasn't that close to my granddad. I loved him. Don't get me wrong, I love my granddad. I love all my family, but I wasn't that close. Or at least not as close as I imagine other people's relationships with their grandparents are, like my best friend in first school. It just didn't seem to make sense. And then the time goes on, and the funeral. Now, I remember not being allowed into the funeral. At least not the beginning service, because it was an open casket. Now, I really wanted to go. I really wanted to see what a dead body looked like. But my parents said no. I was told to stay in the car with some cousins and some nephews and nieces until that part of the funeral was over. We could then go to the church, the crematorium, and do the final service there. And I just remember sitting in that car just thinking, what would a dead body look like? And I remember asking the adult who came into the car, I can't remember who it was who was driving us, but I said, like, what did they look like? Because that fascinated me. And the description I got is they look like themselves, just like they're not there. So then we went to the wake afterwards, and I remember the journey there. I remember there being almost a fight because we were at a junction crossroads and a taxi tried to overtake illegally, and when you're in that state of mind anyway, your emotions are just super heightened. So everyone just piled out of the cars and they wanted something to kick off, I think. Nothing did, thankfully. But it's just that raw emotion, and people say you've got to learn how to channel it. But how can you channel something that you don't really know what you're experiencing? Like, you're reacting. You're not thinking, you're reacting. And hindsight's a wonderful thing after the fact. But in that moment, all you're thinking about is you've lost your dad, you've lost your granddad, you've lost your brother, whatever. And if something tips you the wrong way, you're off. And then we had the wake. And that's really all I remember. I remember listening to Phil Collins' song, True Colours. And that would set me off crying over my granddad. I'd just play it just so that I could cry and think about my granddad. My dad had this picture of my granddad on the mantelpiece, and I would look at it and just cry. And every now and again, I would find my dad crying. And when he saw me, he'd give me this massive hug. Or he would do the manly thing of wiping the tear away and just getting on with it. I don't think he ever processed that grief. I hope he did. And if he did it without me knowing. But from what I can gather, he just bottled it down and just carried on. He was now the head of the family. I mean, my grandma was the head, but like, my dad was the eldest male. So then 10 years pass. I'm now 20 and my grandma dies. My grandma dies in January. A month notorious now for pictures. My dad died in January, my mum died in January, my birthday's in January, but this death, I can't remember for the life in me. I know I got super close to my grandma since granddad passed. My mum would do all these things for my grandma. And I remember my grandma being in hospital and we'd go and visit her. In fact, one time when she was getting discharged from hospital, my mum went dressed as a witch, handed my grandma a broom and said, "There's your ride home, you wicked witch," and just made everybody crack up laughing. Like, they had this beautiful little comedy relationship between them both, and it was lovely. And because they had that, I had that. I remember one Christmas going round to the nursing home and going to visit my grandma dressed up as Father Christmas, just to make her laugh. And as I was walking out, the receptionist said, "You wouldn't mind just checking in on the other residents, would you?" And I was like, "No, it's fine." So I remember good times with my grandma. I don't remember her passing. I don't remember her funeral. I remember her wake. I remember there being this issue with my dad and one of my brothers. Again, my family is complicated, man. So I have 4 brothers and 2 sisters, all step. And one of my brothers refuses to believe that my dad's his dad. I've never met him, like, personally, to go up and say hello to him. I've never met him. But he was there at my grandma's funeral. And my dad went up to him to shake his hand and let bygones be bygones. And he brushed him away. And that, for me, that was the last straw. Like, I don't want anything to do with him anymore. And that's sad that that would happen at a funeral. And that's all I remember. Now, when I was talking to Tony on his podcast, I worked out that my grandma died in 2005. My dad passed in 2009. And that's only 4 years. 4 years between mother and son. And maybe because I was 20 and that time in my life was all chaotic anyway, I was trying to get into drama school. I'd broken up with one girlfriend, got with another girlfriend. I was drinking a lot. Maybe I've blocked that out because a lot of my focus then went on my dad. And I would love to try and get those memories back. And if that's possible, then I'm all for it. But that is my first real experiences with death. What I would say about all this is I feel guilt, ashamed. I just feel bad that I don't know these 4 wonderful beings as well as I would have liked. I mean, without these 4 wonderful beings, I wouldn't be here. Without these 4 wonderful beings, my parents wouldn't have been here. And I remember bits of stories from them. And yes, I can speak to my aunties and uncles about all these things, but it's not the same as getting to know them on a personal level. And I remember being younger and going, "Oh, do I have to go to grandma's? oh, do I have to go and see Grandad? And I wish I could go back there now and listen to their stories, be enriched by the knowledge that they had to pass on. So my advice to anybody listening to this is, if you have grandmas and granddads, or if you have relatives of an older generation, or if you know someone who is ill at the moment, go and make the time to speak with them. Go make the time to learn everything you can about them, because once they're gone, you're not going to get that time back. And those stories, those memories, they're the things that live on. They're the things that we can cling on to. And lastly, for coincidences regarding the Petchers and the Smiths, my dad was the oldest of 7, which meant Grandma and Grandad Petcher had 7 kids. My mum was the youngest of 7, which meant Grandma and Grandad Smith had 7 kids. I, too, am the youngest of 7 on my dad's side. So these numbers, I'm crazy interested to find out what these numbers mean. 10 seems to be a bad number. 7 seems to be a good number. I don't know. Maybe it's all just hocus pocus. Who knows? Anyway, that's me waffling on for way too long about my grandparents. Do you know, I came to this episode and I thought, how am I going to stretch this out? Don't even know them that well. But it looks like I've been talking for a fair while. So I'm going to finish my brew, which is cold now. And I hope to speak to you all again soon on episode 3 of the Mourning Brew.